In the depths of the ancient forest, a full moon hung low in the sky, its light casting eerie shadows that danced between the towering trees. The village of Niln, hidden deep within the wilderness, had always been known for strange occurrences, rumors of creatures that roamed the woods at night. Creatures with eyes that glowed like embers and howls that chilled the bones of even the bravest men. No one dared speak of the werewolves openly, but everyone knew they existed. They were whispered about in hushed tones, in prayers, and in the silences between breaths. Lyra, a young woman with hair the color of midnight and eyes like storm clouds, had always felt drawn to the forest, despite the warnings of her elders. She was different from the others in Niln, fearless, curious, and with a strange connection to the wilds. She often wandered the woods alone, feeling the pulse of nature beneath her feet, sensing the unseen eyes that followed her every step. One evening, while the moon was just beginning to rise, Lyra ventured deeper into the forest than ever before. Her heart raced with a mixture of excitement and dread as she walked the forgotten paths. The air felt heavier, charged with a strange energy, and the howls in the distance grew louder, more distinct. But something was different tonight. The howls weren't the wild calls of a hunting pack. They sounded mournful. As Lyra approached a clearing, she froze at the sight before her. Standing in the center of the moonlit glade was a massive figure, half man, half elf. Its fur was dark as night, but its eyes glowed with a sadness she could almost feel. Around the werewolf, smaller figures, wolves, their forms shifting in and out of human shapes, stood in a circle, their heads bowed. She crouched behind a tree, watching, heart pounding in her chest. The scene felt sacred, ancient. The werewolf at the center raised its head toward the sky and let out a howl that shook the very ground beneath her. But it wasn't a cry of anger or hunger. It was a lament, a plea. Lyra's hand brushed against the cold, hard ground, and she felt something beneath the soil. Digging through the dirt with trembling fingers, she unearthed a small, rune-covered stone, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Her breath hitched. She had heard of these stones, ancient relics of a time when the werewolves were not just beasts but guardians of the land, protectors of a balance long since shattered. Suddenly, the air around her shifted. The werewolf's glowing eyes snapped toward her hiding place, and before she could react, it was standing before her, towering and imposing. Its breath was ragged, its claws gleaming in the dim light, but it did not attack. Instead, it spoke, its voice deep and gravelly, echoing with centuries of sorrow. "You found it," it said. "The Stone of the Covenant. It holds the power to restore what was lost, but also to destroy what remains." Lyra's mind raced. She had never believed in the old stories of balance and power, of ancient werewolf clans that once ruled these lands with wisdom. Yet, here was living proof of those legends. She clutched the stone tightly, feeling its warmth seep into her skin, and looked up into the werewolf's eyes. "There is a war coming," the creature said, its voice barely a whisper. "Not between man and beast, but between us. Between those who seek to preserve the ancient ways, and those who would twist them for darkness. You, human, are bound to this now. You hold the key." Before Lyra could respond, the werewolf stepped back into the shadows, its form merging with the forest. The other wolves followed silently, disappearing into the night. Lyra stood alone in the clearing, the weight of the stone heavy in her hand. She knew her life had just changed forever, and with it, the fate of both man and werewolf hung in the balance. But she didn't know who to trust. Would she use the stone to restore the ancient covenant, or fall prey to the darker forces that had already begun to stir within the werewolf clans? The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint echo of a howl, a reminder that the battle was just beginning. And the moon, ever watchful, seemed to glow a little brighter, as if it sensed the storm that was coming. Days passed, and Lyra couldn't shake the encounter in the forest. The stone she had unearthed pulsed faintly at all hours, its glow both mesmerizing and unsettling. She kept it hidden beneath her cloak, but she could feel its warmth radiating against her skin, like a living heartbeat. The village of Niln, meanwhile, was on edge. Strange things had begun to happen. Cattle were found mutilated at the edge of the forest, and villagers reported hearing unsettling whispers in the night, though no one could find their source. People began speaking of the old werewolf legends once more, their voices laced with fear. Lyra kept her secret close, but with every passing day, the weight of the stone grew heavier, as if it was beckoning her toward something she couldn't yet understand. One evening, as she sat by the fire, lost in thought, a soft knock sounded at her door. Startled, she hid the stone in a drawer before answering. Standing outside was an old woman, wrapped in a tattered shawl, her eyes sharp and knowing. Lyra recognized her as Alira, one of the village's elders. A woman whispered to have ties to the ancient magics that had long been forbidden. "You found it, haven't you?" Alira said, her voice gravelly with age but steady with certainty. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. How could this woman possibly know? She stepped aside, allowing Alira to enter. The old woman moved with surprising grace for her age, her eyes scanning the room, as if searching for something specific. "Sit, child," Alira said, motioning toward the fire. "We have much to discuss." Reluctantly, Lyra obeyed, her heart racing. The elder sat across from her, her gaze piercing. "The stone you found is older than you can imagine," Alira began. "It holds the power to unite or destroy the werewolf clans. For centuries, they've been divided, some loyal to the ancient ways, others seeking to twist their power for personal gain. You've stumbled into something far bigger than yourself." Lyra swallowed hard. "The werewolf told me the same," she said quietly, "but I don't understand what I'm supposed to do with it." Alira's eyes narrowed. "The stone chose you for a reason. It binds you to their world now, whether you like it or not. But you must be careful. There are forces at work that seek to control you, to use the stone for their own ends." Before Lyra could ask more, the door burst open with a gust of cold wind. Standing in the doorway was a man she had never seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, and cloaked in black, his eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, a telltale sign of the werewolf within. "Alira," he growled, his voice deep and menacing. "You've meddled enough." The elder rose slowly, her gaze unwavering. "Kieran," she said, her voice calm. "You have no authority here." Kieran stepped forward, his presence filling the room with an oppressive energy. "The girl has the stone. She belongs to us now. You know what the clans will do if they find out." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the stone pulsing again, this time more intensely, as if reacting to Kieran's presence. "I belong to no one," Lyra said, standing her ground. Kieran's eyes flicked to her, a dangerous smile curling at the corner of his lips. "You think you have a choice? The moment you touched that stone, you were bound to our world. And there are those who will do anything to claim its power. You can either come willingly or—" Alira stepped between them. "She will choose her own path, Kieran. You forget the old ways still hold sway." Kieran's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. "The old ways are dying, Alira. Soon, nothing will remain but war." With a final glare, he turned and vanished into the night, leaving a tense silence in his wake. Alira turned to Lyra, her expression grim. "That was only the beginning. There are more like him, some worse. They will come for you, and they won't stop until they have the stone." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. "What do I do?" Alira's gaze softened, but her words were firm. "You must seek the Bloodstone Keep. It lies far beyond these woods, in the heart of the mountain ranges. There, the ancient council of the werewolves still resides, those who remember the true purpose of the stone. They will help you, but the journey will be perilous, and you won't be the only one seeking its power." Lyra nodded, determination hardening her resolve. She had no choice now but to embrace the destiny that had been thrust upon her. The stone had chosen her, and with it, the fate of both man and werewolf rested in her hands. But even as she prepared to leave, a shadow lingered at the edge of her thoughts, a question that haunted her. Who could she truly trust? The old legend spoke of betrayal within the clans. The werewolves were not just divided by ideals, but by blood. And somewhere, lurking in the shadows, was a figure more dangerous than Kieran, who sought the stone not for unity, but for absolute power. As Lyra gathered her things and prepared to set out, she could feel As watching her from the darkness, waiting for the moment to strike. The forest whispered its warning. Asterisk, asterisk, the hunt had begun, asterisk, asterisk. The journey to Bloodstone Keep was grueling, stretching across untamed wilderness and treacherous mountains. Lyra traveled by night, her path guided by the faint pulsing of the stone, which seemed to know the way even when she felt lost. Alira had given her warnings, but nothing could have prepared her for the constant feeling of being hunted. Shadows moved at the edges of her vision, and strange howls echoed in the night. One evening, after days of travel, Lyra found herself standing at the foot of Bloodstone Keep. The fortress loomed above her, its blackened stone walls twisting into the sky like ancient claws. The air was colder here, thick with a sense of old magic. She hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, the stone glowing brighter in her hand as if urging her forward. Inside the keep, she found herself in a vast hall, its walls lined with ancient carvings depicting the history of the werewolves, once proud guardians of balance between man and nature, now torn apart by greed and lust for power. At the far end of the hall stood a group of figures, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The ancient council. "We've been expecting you," said one of them, a tall woman with silver hair and eyes that burned with wisdom. "The stone has called you here. It is time for the old ways to be restored." Lyra stepped forward, holding out the stone. "I don't understand. Why me? I'm not one of you." The woman smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "The stone chooses not by blood, but by heart. You have the strength to restore balance, something that even we have lost sight of. But there is still one test left." Suddenly, the doors to the keep burst open, and Kiran appeared, flanked by a group of werewolves. His eyes glowed with fury, and his smile was predatory. "I told you she belongs to us," he growled. "You think the council will protect you, girl? The clans are beyond saving." The council members stepped back, their eyes weary. "The choice is yours, Lyra," the silver-haired woman said softly. "You can give the stone to him, or you can keep it and restore what was lost. But know this power comes at a cost." Kiran advanced, his claws gleaming in the dim light. "Give it to me, and I will end this war. I will bring peace. In my own way." Lyra's heart pounded as she looked between Kiran and the council. The stone pulsed in her hand, its warmth steady, reassuring. She understood now. The power of the stone wasn't just in its magic, it was in the choices it presented. Taking a deep breath, she held the stone high, its glow brightening to a blinding light. Kiran snarled, lunging toward her, but as he neared, the stone released a pulse of energy that knocked him back, his body crashing into the stone walls. Lyra stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "I choose balance. I choose unity." The stone's light filled the hall, spreading out in waves that washed over the council, over Kiran, and out into the world beyond the keep. The weight of centuries of division and hatred began to lift, replaced by something new, a calm, an understanding that had been long forgotten. Kiran struggled to his feet, his eyes wide with disbelief. What have you done?" He growled, but his voice was weak, as if the very energy of his hatred had been drained away. "I've ended the war," Lyra said quietly, her eyes meeting his. "Not by force, but by restoring what was lost." Kiran staggered back, his claws retracting. The ferocity in his eyes faded, replaced by something else, perhaps regret, perhaps a realization that he had been wrong all along. Without another word, he turned and left, his figure disappearing into the night. The council members stood in silence, their eyes reflecting the soft glow of the stone. The silver-haired woman stepped forward, placing a hand on Lyra's shoulder. "You've done what we could not," she said, her voice filled with reverence. "The clans will feel the change, and they will return to the old ways. The balance has been restored." Lyra felt the weight of the stone lessen in her hand, and as she looked down, it crumbled into dust, its power spent. The choice had been made, and the path forward was clear. In the days that followed, the werewolf clans began to mend. Old rivalries dissolved, and those who had fought for power laid down their weapons. The forest once again became a place of peace, a sanctuary for both men and werewolf alike. Lyra returned to Niln, but she was no longer the same. She was a part of something greater now, a bridge between two worlds. The villagers no longer spoke of werewolves in hushed tones, for the creatures had returned to their role as protectors, guardians of the balance that Lyra had restored. And though the stone was gone, the legacy of its power remained etched in the land, in the hearts of the werewolves, and in Lyra herself. The moon, ever watchful, now shone with a softer glow, as if it too was at peace, its light a beacon of hope for the future. And for the first time in centuries, the forest was quiet, peaceful, but deep in the heart of the wilderness, beyond the reach of man, shadows still lingered. The werewolves had found balance, but there were others who sought the stone's power for themselves, waiting, watching, for the next time the balance would be threatened. The end of this story, perhaps, was only the beginning of another.